Hi, Umesh. Welcome to Venture with Grace. We're live.
Grace, it's great to be with you.
To start the show, I would love for the audience to get to know you a little bit more. So I think you're one of the first entrepreneur who are like doing so successfully, like just not like, right after, like not like, I guess like who has like been at the company for like 17 years. I feel like that's a big accomplishment. And then maybe before we jump into Uniphore, why don't we talk about like, what were some core career lessons that you've learned early on in your career kind of shape you into who you are today?
Yeah, that's a great starting point, Grace. I think of the last 17 years as an overnight success at Uniphore. Um,
Mhm.
a lot of people who know Uniphore today or come to know us and think about our success as an AI company don't usually understand the journey that it's taken in building this company. I'm a computer science engineer by background. And I had attempted with my co-founder to start another company in the mid 2000s, before AI and the mobile days. And then we started an AI company in 2007, 2008, way before Gen AI, way before LLMs. Those AI models were very different when we started. One of the lessons that stuck with me from the beginning is
Mhm.
a mentor of mine telling me that, Umesh, as you're looking to do your next venture, which became Uniphore, um, be very thoughtful about, do you want to build a feature or do you want to build a product?
Mhm.
Or the thing that you're doing, is that a company? And there's a big difference between those three. And it's taken me a long time, and I've reflected on that over 17 years, but that still holds true. Even today, when we build something new, when we acquire a company, we
Mhm.
constantly put it through this lens of, is that a feature? Is that a product? Or in itself, could it be a company?
Mhm. Okay. So maybe we could start with like, what was the first product you guys have built and then how does that evolve into like a giant unicorn today of it is today?
Yeah. So the origin story of Uniphore goes back to us starting to work with conversational AI in the
Mhm.
pre-Gen AI era, which meant
Mhm.
building AI models for speech to text, text to speech, and natural language processing. And we were building these AI models with uh, the B2B environment in mind,
Mhm.
that we wanted to build these technologies
Mhm.
to serve some applications into business customers. Um, and when we had the first few prototypes for some languages, we were, hitting some accuracy benchmarks. We started to approach customers early on. Um, and this was an era where speech to text and natural language wasn't as accurate or popular as it is today, and certainly not in languages outside of English.
Mhm.
And that's what we started to do. We approached banks and hospitals and telecom companies to say, in a non-English language, getting to your consumers, we can do conversational AI without
Mhm.
really an end use case in mind. We wanted to learn from our customers, from these businesses. And one of those businesses was wise enough to say, you know I think the best use case for your technology in my company is in this area called the call center.
Mhm.
And we said, we don't know much about the call center. Can you explain what use case you might have in mind for conversational AI in a call center? And the very first use case that this customer, he happened to be a risk officer in a bank, a very large multinational bank. He said, look, every call that comes into our call center, we tell the customer that your call will be recorded for quality and training purposes.
Mhm.
Which means we have millions of these recordings.
Mhm.
And then what we do with these recordings is we have yet another team which listens to these recordings. And because we're dependent on people, we can only listen to 1% sample. It's a random sample. Only 1% of these recordings we can listen to it.
Mhm.
And not only are we trying to improve our quality, we're also looking for risk signals. And because he was the risk officer,
Mhm.
he said, look, I care deeply about listening to 100% of these calls, because there could
Mhm.
be risk or fraud in any of these calls. And that's impossible without AI. That's impossible if we keep scaling our team of people. So the very first product that he encouraged Uniphore to build was a conversational analytics product,
Mhm.
a product that could, in offline manner, pick up these recordings, use speech to text, natural language to run through these recordings, transcribe it, understand what's in it, understand the intent of these conversations, and flag risk signals or quality signals. And that product was the first application of conversational AI at Uniphore. Fast forward, Uniphore then built several different products in the customer service arena to
Mhm.
be both co-pilot to call center agents were human agents receiving these calls, and be self-service chatbots, voice bots over time. And up until 2020, right at the beginning of COVID, Uniphore had close to 1,000 enterprises using those products already.
Mhm.
And then COVID uh, made one big shift for us. Every single department of the businesses that we were serving went virtual. And so, not just the call center, but HR teams and marketing teams and
Mhm.
sales teams started to conduct business on video meetings or phone calls.
Mhm.
And that gave us an opportunity to say, hey, up until this point, we've only thought of conversational AI for customer service.
Mhm.
We can now expand horizontally into conversational AI for many different departments in a company. So we built applications with our AI technology for marketing, for sales, HR. But each time, what we were doing is, because we come from an engineering background, we said, look, it's going to be inefficient to build each of these apps grounds up. A lot of
Mhm.
the components that go into these apps, the AI models, the data pipelines are shared, whether it's customer service or sales or marketing. A lot of those components are shared. And then there is a unique end user experience that we give differently for a call center worker versus a salesperson versus an HR person. So the shared components, we said, let's build a platform such that we don't have to recreate AI models and data pipelines over and over. So we built a platform, and all of these apps that Uniphore built post 2020 were sitting on a single platform. And that gave the impetus to the one final pivot that we've had so far. When Gen AI happened and our customers realized the power of Gen AI and large language models, they realized that up until that point, they had used AI and they had purchased AI from companies like Uniphore, but they
Mhm.
have bought it in a software as a service manner as an application. And every line of business leader, the chief sales officer, the chief
Mhm.
customer service officer, the chief marketing officer, were making their decisions. In Gen AI, the decision maker for AI became one, and
Mhm.
it became centralized with the CIO.
Mhm.
And the CIO realized, I no longer will have to buy separate SaaS apps.
Mhm.
AI can be a horizontal platform,
Mhm.
and we can build AI agents across the company. The fact
Mhm.
that Uniphore already had the platform, we allowed our customers now to use our platform as a service. And that's what became the Business AI Cloud that today Uniphore sells to over 2,000 customers.
Mhm.
And the Business AI Cloud in these enterprises is their end-to-end data and AI platform. So that's cliff notes of the history of our evolution.
I love that. So I just did my second conference this year 2 days ago. So like President of Cisco was speaking, Sierra of Nebius, and at our conference, I think like one of the most resonating point is like a lot of like startups trying to scale into bigger companies, right? But like I think is exactly like what you said. Like you guys entered with one product and then expand into the entire organization with like different AI offerings. So maybe we could start with like, since like when I go on your website, you have some of the biggest customers in the world, right? Like from Priceline to HP to DocuSign to Atlassian to Bloomberg to JCPenney. So like when you are thinking about like selling to these different companies, especially, I think we're both coming from an immigrant background. So how do you first of all like build up this pipeline of clients in the US, and what was the early conversation like, especially when you have to educate the market about customer success, about like how they could use AI, prior to the pandemic era. It sounds like the pandemic plays into like a really big factor into the scaling part. But I guess like maybe from the 0 to 1 phase, how was the conversation kind of look like for the folks, and then like how do you kind of like expand, like I guess like from the 2,000 customers, like do you start getting the bigger logo first, or do you start with like startup first? What was the go to market motion like back then?
Yeah, so from the beginning,
Hmm.
we were very clear on who our ideal customer profile was going to
Hmm.
be. And that is one thing, again, we were very deliberate about, and it hasn't changed ever since Uniphore was founded.
Hmm.
We were very clear that we were going to build products for some of the biggest companies in the world. Said another way, for the global 2000 businesses. So the top 2000 companies in the world, which include Fortune 500, which is top 500, and then
Hmm.
go a little bit beyond that. And that gave us a focus from the beginning of what type of product will we have to build for it to solve real problems and deliver outcomes to these businesses.
Hmm.
When we had early prototypes or demos or early versions of these products, um, I was the first salesperson as founder CEO. In the 0 to 1 phase, you're not only selling to your first customer, you're also finding product market fit. And
Hmm.
until product market fit is found, it's not wise to start scaling up sales teams, because there's not enough of repeatability or playbook yet for you to start scaling sales teams. And we realized that early. So I, as a computer science engineer who was up until that point working on writing code or building the product, learned from my mentors how to become a salesperson. And I used some of my early investors and board members to make some introductions. And they were, kind enough to make C-suite introductions in some of the biggest companies.
Hmm.
Our very first customer who agreed to be a paying customer of Uniphore was Thomson Reuters,
Hmm.
a Fortune 500 company. Um, then it was United Health Group. And then the series of customers post that, large telecom companies, large banks. We started to learn from these customers how they wanted to use our product. It also allowed us to very rapidly work on iterations of our product that were applicable to these businesses, made our product stronger, more
Hmm.
robust. But by doing the first, I call it 7 to 10 sales, very hands on myself, I was able to gather the trends and make a playbook out of it. Once I had that, then we hired a VP of sales. And that was a person who came from a larger company. She had learned how to scale sales teams at a much larger scale, but I was at least able to give her this initial playbook of why did one of the biggest healthcare companies in the world, one of the biggest telecom companies in the world, what did they buy and why did they buy it? Who were the competitors they were uh, assessing against our product, and how did we win against that competition? We wrote down these on documents and called them playbooks. And then that became the material that she was able to recruit new sellers, train them on this content, and then start creating a pipeline of new opportunities. By the
Hmm.
way, even today, we have over 2,000 customers, several of which are Fortune 500. Last year, we crossed 600 million of total bookings, and this year, we're going to grow that number over 80%. So even today at this scale, when we launch a new product, Grace, the process is still the same. Uh, Depending on the importance of the product, if you're launching a new feature or a whole new product, we encourage our product teams, product managers, to do exactly what I did, to be part of the first sale, to learn product market fit, and then teach the sellers what's working. And sometimes we do a very major product release, a complete platform shift, like we did with the Business AI Cloud, in
Hmm.
which case I go back to being the first seller again. This time I have a much larger network of customers that I can already call on. We built relationships over time and have the ability to very quickly call 10, 15, 20 CIOs who already trust Uniphore and get them to see our new product and give us very quick feedback. And now the flywheel moves much faster. But that 0 to 1 mentality, we
Hmm.
maintain that each time we've released something new at Uniphore.
Hmm. I have so many questions. I was taking notes furiously. I think this is such a great lesson. So, like, basically, let me recap. Like, first of all, like, as the founder, you have to sell the first thing yourself, and then, like, maybe finding advisors and impactful mentors, like, to make the introduction to a very high level person from a top company. And then after that, I think, like, I guess going back to that, like one of the first thing you have to do is like identify who you want you to be the customer. And then I have a question on the client identification thing, and then we can talk about the playbook later. Um, from the client identification, I think like at the beginning, when I first started my own company, I was like studying a lot of these like other media company or like other companies like playbook. But I guess like one thing is like, how do you think like Fortune 500 is like the right starting point, and like how do you think about like the scale or infrastructure that they need? Because I think not every tech company can just immediately powering Thomas Reuters or like all these like top company like United Health. And do you build up like a really strong infra first, like let's call it spending 3 years to building that out and then onboarding these large customer, or like do you learn from like startups first to like get some sort of feedback? But the problem is like the startup facing different set of problems. Also, another curiosity I had was like, the other day I was listening to a podcast about CoreWave. CoreWave's like major clients are like 75% or something are made up by like the big company, like one or two company, that kind of thing. So, or like within like 10 clients. So I just thought that was so interesting. It's like it is a very successful company. However, it is very heavily concentrated on one or two big bats. Selling to Fortune 500 may have that kind of problem. Like, if one client left and maybe 20% of the revenue is gone, like, how do you think about the revenue side of things as well?
Yeah, so there's three or four different things to unpack
Yeah,
in that
sorry about
topic.
my chain of question.
No, but it's all interlinked. So, it makes sense to talk about all of them together. This is a common mistake, Grace, that I see early entrepreneurs and smaller companies make, is not being very intentional
Mhm,
about their ideal customer profile. It's very important at the beginning, even before the product is being made, to be very
mhm,
clear about who are you making the product for. Not
mhm,
all customers are the same. If you want to create a product for mid-market companies or smaller businesses, then first of all, the product needs to have a lot of self-service options, because by definition, those customers won't pay for professional services. They would want to quickly do things on their own. They'll want the ability to turn on the product as quickly as possible.
mhm,
And if that's the segment a company needs to go after, then trying to learn from startups is a good thing.
mhm,
By the way, there's also another nuance. If within mid market or smaller companies, if your industry that you want to sell into isn't just restricted to high tech,
mhm,
then only learning from technology startups isn't always going to be the right signal
mhm,
for the company, because technology startups might use the product in a certain way, whereas a mid-market retail company or insurance company might use the product differently. So if you only sold to startups before you start to scale into your actual customer segment, you probably didn't learn the right signal and your product is not fully ready. In the case of Uniphore, from the beginning, we were clear that our products, whether it was conversational AI for customer service or conversational AI for the whole enterprise, and today an end-to-end data and AI platform called the Business AI Cloud, every time we build these products, we've been very clear we are only building the product for global 2000 firms, because the problem we want to solve is at a much higher scale. That problem requires a you know very heavy horsepower technology, namely AI, and we're going to be very deliberate to solve the problem for those companies. In which case, for us to try out the product with some startups early on might give us quick wins and put some points on the scoreboard from a revenue standpoint, but will never give us the right signal that when I go in front of a CIO of a major bank or a major insurance company or a major telecom company, and I say, but look, 10 different startups in Silicon Valley use my platform, you should too, it has no correlation. So being very intentional of the ICP, namely ideal customer profile, building products that way for them, for their problems,
Mhm.
and then even the early testing ground customers, the co-development customers, the customer who will give you some grace in the early period of the product should be chosen uh, in correlation with the ideal end goal. And that's a mistake sometimes when companies are not very intentional about it, they make. Then
Mhm.
let's come to the second part of this question, that how do you develop early on and become a platform of choice and become a full infrastructure? And that's a very different ball game. Equally important topic. If on day one a company is born to say, I'm going to go and ask the enterprise to replace 15 different things with my platform because I have now created this big infrastructure, which is amazing. Even if the claim is true, going to a large company, going to a CIO, and asking them to rip and replace not one, not two, but several things that they made long term decisions on towards your platform
Mhm.
isn't a winning strategy. The number of times that's going to work is zero.
Mhm.
And so, when playing in the arena of large enterprise, knowing how to fit in the ecosystem of what exists,
Mhm.
having integrations, having APIs, having the ability to say, we understand that to solve this problem, you might have other pieces of the jigsaw puzzle already taken care of. And we are coming with a platform that will work well with your current IT environment. That's important. Again,
Mhm.
not true for mid market or SMBs. Mid
Mhm.
market or SMBs might not have
Mhm.
many IT things, IT parts of the IT infrastructure already in place. And if you're building a product or a platform for that segment, it's important to be more complete and more wholesome. And you're asking the customer to bet a big part of their business on your platform or your product or your feature. So it comes down to being intentional in picking your ICP, testing the market with that ICP, entering even with a small foot in the door as being part of a larger ecosystem. And then once you're in, like Uniphore was with contact center, and expanding with use cases around sales and marketing and HR. And once we had more than 3 use cases, we decided to become an enterprise-wide platform. So,
Mhm.
having that intentionality of growing within the customers from day one is truly important.
Mm. I think like your highlight about intentionality is like extremely important. I guess like another question along that line is like I think obviously a lot of startups that want to sell to the big company, right? I think building up the trust is very hard and like having the right advisor to introduce them to the right person is also very hard. First of all, like how do you get the incentive alignment very straight that like people feel comfortable to introduce you to uh the big companies like C levels, right? So like a lot of the VCs in Silicon Valley have that connection, but it's not like every startup will get the kind of introduction, right? So like how do you stand out among, five other portfolio company that are also asking the same intro to the same guy? That's one problem, the or one question. And then the other part is like when you're thinking about like these like selling to big companies, it they have long sales cycle, and then I think maybe mostly lower churn than like startups, I would imagine. But on the other hand, I feel like there is some sort of risk associated to it as like if they leave, then a huge chunk of the business is kind of like going with them. So like I guess like how do you think about um building a really high profile like client base but also like make sure that they stay or make sure that like if a company decided to build something in house and like your company is not at risk of like losing a huge chunk of business.
Um, so again, let's look at it in three different tracks.
Mhm.
First, the paths to getting introduced.
Mhm.
before you have a full sales team and a go-to-market team and a
Mhm.
pipeline generation. Again, intentionality plays a big role. It's
Mhm.
one thing to go to a VC or a board member who could have relationships to say, who can you connect me to? I'm trying to test this market, versus
Mhm.
I have done my homework. There is this VP of data platforms in so and so bank, and his name is John Smith. I saw on LinkedIn you're already connected to that person. By the way, I think here's a paragraph on what you tell them about my company. Can you please make that intro with my paragraph?
Mhm.
So you see the difference between who can you connect me with
Mhm.
versus I have done my homework. Here's the person. You already have the connection, and I'm giving you the script of what you should do. Is step one. Being intentional again to go to those VCs, because these relationships are treasured and these
Mhm.
relationships are based on trust.
Mhm.
Those customers also, when they get a phone call from the VC or the board member, they expect high quality companies to be introduced. They may or may not always end up becoming customers,
Mhm.
but the reason they'll always answer the VC's call is they believe they'll be introduced to some new exciting innovation. And if
Mhm.
the VC is not responsible in making introductions, then the VC would lose the relationship over time and credibility. And so, when asking somebody to use their credibility to make an introduction, we have to do the job for them. We have to
Mhm.
search the person, do the homework of what that person may be interested in, and create a message, a blurb, an email, a text message that they can use to create the interest
Mhm.
in the person. The second point is, again, knowing which level in the company to call to.
Mm.
To say that I want to sell to this telecom company, introduce me to the CEO, is again a novice mistake. The CEO in
Mhm.
a publicly traded company, a Fortune 500 company, isn't going to be making decisions on a data platform or an AI
Mhm.
app or a customer service platform.
Mhm.
They would expect their teams, their CIOs, to make that introduction. So even if you somehow gain access to the CEO, you go to a conference, get lucky, one of your advisors makes the intro, you will exactly have 2 minutes with them before they make an introduction to somebody in the company, which is ideally the right level. So knowing that at what level does your offering appeal to? If you're trying to sell a company-wide broad infrastructure platform that will have billions of dollars of impact, whether revenue or cost, okay, go call on the CEO.
Mhm.
You're trying to sell a product that fits in a larger ecosystem, maybe call the CIO, but maybe even one below the CIO. You're trying to sell a feature within a certain product, call on the line of business leader, the CMO, the VP of marketing, the chief revenue officer, VP of revenue operations, head of customer service, and say, we know you have a lot of technology, but yet this is one problem we think you may not have solved, and we have a product that could solve that problem. So depending on the offering, knowing at which level you want to get connected to is the second important distinguishing factor.
Mhm.
Third comes to the point of concentration of revenue. Again, I'll say, Grace, for the audience, there's no right or wrong. Some startups can choose from the beginning to be focused on
Mhm.
mid-market or SMB, and others might choose from the beginning to be enterprise focused. The only thing I'll say is never get confused and never mix go-to-market motions.
Mhm.
Salesforce, not until they were a billion in ARR did they start selling more seriously into the enterprise. Up until a billion in ARR, they stuck to a very formidable mid-market and SMB focus. Their
Mhm.
entire go-to-market was optimized to be a machine to get them very high velocity revenue and new customers and expansion in mid-market and SMB. And not until 1 billion of ARR did they
Mhm.
now develop a new muscle called enterprise.
Mhm.
If we start to mix go-to-market motions, then what we're doing is we're taking very limited resources that an early stage startup has and trying to throw it around in different motions, and which is not a recipe to create a repeatable and a growing
Mhm.
sales motion. So if somebody does decide to be like Uniphore, and be focused on large businesses, global 2000 businesses, Fortune 500 businesses, then it's not enough to think about go to market as a customer acquisition strategy. But a key part of that go to market is customer success, which is the post sale strategy.
Hmm.
Like you said, CoreWeave has a lot of its revenue concentrated in 10 customers.
Hmm.
Uniphore also, when it began and for the longest time, had a high customer dollar concentration on a handful of customers. And if any one of them decides to churn or uh, you run the risk of losing them, then that's almost a fatal blow to the company at a growing stage when you're trying to raise money, etc.
Hmm.
So then it's important to think about what could go wrong. Why would this customer not stick around, not buy more, but churn? Well, the product may or may not work. That's in your control. If you're selling to an enterprise, better build a product that's high quality and delivers value. But second, again, knowing the difference between a feature and a
Hmm.
product and a company. Long ago, I was having a conversation with somebody who was an early mentor, and then I made them an advisor in the company. And I said, look, we are selling into the enterprise. And they said, stop, stop, stop. You think you're selling into the enterprise, name your customers. And I said, telco this, bank that, retail company this. And I said, this is as enterprisey as it gets. They said, yes, but tell me who in that enterprise has bought you. And it turns out that we had sold to a division within a department of that enterprise. All right. So we had sold to, a branch, let's say, and solved a problem for the head of the branch of the enterprise. Whereas a lot of these technology decisions at a platform level are decided at the CIO, sometimes with CFO involved, sometimes with CEO involved. And you might solve a problem for a mid-level executive within a department, within a division. But someday, a massive enterprise level deal can get done at the top, which gets imposed on different parts of the company. And even if your product was working fine and the relationship was great, you were just not high enough in the customer organization. And that's a lesson on customer success, that the post sale motion of customer success shouldn't just be about, are they using my product? Are they going to renew my contract?
Hmm.
It should be about going wide and going deep in the organization and relationships. So if person A was the decision maker and they bought your
Hmm.
product, the goal for customer success should be, get me in front of 30 more executives. Let me go educate them on what we are doing with one division and one department. By the way, if I sold at a VP level and they're happy with me, let's ask them for an introduction to the senior vice president and then eventually to the CIO. I
Hmm.
should also go below the VP level because sometimes the users who are actually using the product may not have big titles, but they are big influencers.
Hmm.
So enterprise go-to-market is very complex.
Hmm.
There usually isn't just one buyer and one decision maker. It's a committee. And customer success needs to go wide and deep to prevent that one surprise churn that could become fatal for the company.
Wow, this is such a master class for go to market. I want to piggyback on the last point that you just mentioned about the wide and deep, right? So, like, after I guess, like, first of all, how do you figure out who is the decision maker? And obviously, it doesn't really show on LinkedIn, be like, hey, who is actually buying what? But obviously, at this point, you probably already know. But at the beginning, how do you figure out as a smaller company? Like, how do you know who is the right person to talk to? And the other sub category question, I'm sorry, I'm like doing so many questions at once, but it's kind of like a sub segment question. Is like, um, do you as a CEO have to talk to from, let's say if you are selling let's say like the customer success product to the, I guess, chief like CIO, and then to also like the director of customer success, or maybe also like, some people who is actually just working in customer success or engineering team on the customer success team. Like, how do you do the multi-level selling to make it like wide and deep?
Yeah. So again, let's tackle the first part that you wanted to go after.
Mhm,
How do you determine the right level? Um,
mhm,
and that's, by the way, Grace, a question not just for the early stages of a company, but at
mhm,
every stage of growth of the company. Over time, people have devised various methodologies in go-to-market. It could be MEDIC, MEDPIC. More cruder versions are just the BANT model, just ways of constantly qualifying if the opportunity that you think could be resulting in a close and revenue, how real is it? How predictable can you make it? And one key part of any methodology is about the decision maker. Said differently, are they the technical buyer and are they the economic buyer? You
mm,
can ask or know these questions A by research, but sometimes research could be hard because you don't know how a company works. But
mhm,
you could also see if your competitors in different companies are able to make the deal, make the sale, at which level are they making the sale to? Who's that buyer? And third, if even that's hard to come by,
mhm,
then sometimes maybe you secured a meeting with director of customer success or director of IT or director of analytics or director of data or senior manager here. I'm surprised and shocked how very few salespeople have the confidence to ask the question, by the way, is this your budget? Who else in the company will have to approve this decision?
mhm,
And more often than not, by asking the question, the person on the other side will give you the details. That while it's my department who's going to buy this, but we have this other team that needs to be convinced. And by the way, eventually there's going to be finance and procurement, and we're going to connect you to that process. But there are 16 other people.
mhm,
But if you don't even ask the question, you might spend months trying to convince somebody who may not eventually be the buyer. So following a methodology of sales, whatever your company decides there, but there must be a methodology to qualify the deal, both on the buyer, also the budget. Is their budget available? Okay, I know you're the actual buyer. You can sign the contract. But the way enterprises work is they do budgeting once a year. You can't just show up and sometime middle of the year randomly excite somebody with a whole new feature that they didn't budget for.
mhm,
And say, now you got to pay me $2 million. They may not have $2 million lying around waiting for something to happen. Understanding the budget cycle is also a key part. And then, okay, you find the buyer, you find the budget. How quickly do you want this? Do you need it this
mhm,
quarter? Or is it okay for you if it comes to you next year? In which case, I shouldn't get hopeful and forecast this deal now. Doesn't mean I won't pursue the opportunity.
mhm,
Even if it's next year, I still want your business, but at least I'll be truthful to myself, to my boss, to my board, and not forecast this
mhm.
opportunity. So, again, following a known, time tested go to market or sales methodology is very key. And I'm sorry, I forgot the second part of your question.
Um, I mean, like I think the second part of the question is like, how do you build the relationship as a CEO? Because your time is limited, and I guess like before you write the playbook to hand it out for other people, you have to sell it yourself, right? How do you talk to the engineer? How do you talk to the CIO? It's probably very different. So like, first of all, like I also wrote down like five other questions when you're talking to the prayer one, but we'll save it for after this question. So basically, like, how do you first of all, like, I think you mentioned about like identify by looking at competitors, like who are they doing business with and what level do they close on. um speak and Okay, so I'll like keep it one question at a time. So how do you first of all like establish yourself with like the trust to talk to these different level of people, and how do you get to them too?
Yeah, those are all very good questions, Grace. As you very rightly observed, talking to or pitching to a CEO or a CIO
Mhm.
is very different from even doing it to a director of something, let alone very different from doing it to a data engineer in the company. And depending on where the decision for your product or feature or platform is going to be made, you have to start to get very good about being able to converse in a language that that buyer appreciates. For the most part, a CEO cares a lot about a broad business impact. They're usually looking at top line growth, bottom line impact,
Mhm.
market share, differentiation, etc. A CIO cares a lot about security and enterprise grade and robustness, and it shouldn't break. A mid-level manager or an engineer or a seller might care
Mhm.
about, I have a problem today, man, nobody's solving it, just come and solve it.
Mhm.
And so first, being a good student and a good listener, no matter which level you're trying to sell into, is absolutely key.
Mhm.
The second, a lot of the founders like me come from the technology or computer science background. Um, and in those curriculums, in our undergrads or postgrads, communication isn't given a lot of emphasis. But in selling, that becomes equally important, if not more. And so, first, appreciating that executive presence, being a good communicator, being a good listener is important. And being self aware, if that's not a skill you as the founder or CEO are good at,
Mhm.
then go get help. It's like anything else. If you're weak in a muscle, go develop that muscle. Get a communications coach. Uh, or if there's a good board member or advisor who is very good at that, spend time with them, ask them to coach you, or just observe them. In my case,
Mhm.
John Chambers was a huge influence. I got the opportunity when Uniphore was much younger to sometimes shadow John, even while he was chairman of Cisco, and see how he interacts with not CEOs or chairman of company, prime ministers of or presidents of countries. And that was a great lesson for me that, man, this is a business leader, and this is how he shows up in front of country leaders. And obviously he's still promoting the cause of Cisco, but it's a very different way of selling and representing as opposed to being transactional when you're talking to a mid-level person in a company. And at some point, even that wasn't enough. When I realized I have to get better at this and I have to work on myself, and before I could afford getting myself a paid coach, which at some point I
Mhm.
did, I started identifying people in the tech community that I respect: John Chambers, Larry Ellison, Mark Benioff. And the simplest way to learn is go on YouTube and look at their keynote speeches or their earnings calls or their media appearances and start making notes like a student.
Mhm.
So realizing that communication is
Mhm.
equally as important as the quality of the product, the
Mhm.
technology that we're building, if we have to be effective in being
Mhm.
able to sell to different levels in an enterprise, is a very important skill.
Um, I think that's super interesting. And I like back to a little bit of the previous conversation. You briefly chat about like, competitors, right? So this is a really interesting conversation coming from like my conference 2 days ago. It was like I was chatting about this with the CR of Nabius, and then like he sold well, he had 4 different exit before joining Nabius, and it was all like the product he was selling was all like kind of like competing with some of the biggest companies in the world. Um, and and then basically I think his philosophy was like if there's no big tech competitors, like your product probably is not like in the right traction. So like I guess like how do you think about competitors, and then like what is your relationship, or like how do you build a relationship with people that are like in the same category as like the same size of the business you are when you started, like let's say it's the startups, but also like how do you build a relationship with competitors in the companies that are like a little bit later stage, because I think there's so much nuance to it. For example, I think not everybody is your competitor from day 1 to day 10 or day 400, right? So people or like the product or the company shift, like, there's so much changes. And the other problem is like sometimes you can learn from them as well. Um like, in Chinese it's like, you better keep like the friends close in and your enemy closer. So like that's like kind of like there's some sort of nuance to that as well. How do you think about like who is actually your competitor? And then the other problem is like, how do you navigate the relationship with like, keep being sometimes you have to see each other at like different conferences or something. Like, how do you like maintain the relationship to a degree that's like professional, but also like, not giving out too much about your company secret, but also like not being offensive to the other person to be like creating an enemy out of it.
Yeah. I mean, first and foremost, I think having competition is a gift. And
Mhm.
it just means what you're trying to do is very relevant for the world. More people are
Mhm.
trying to solve it. You just have to be better than them in many ways, and you're going to win the market. But having no competition means you're trying to do something that may or may not be a big problem for the world. And that's why, nobody cares about solving that problem apart from you.
Mhm.
In the case of Uniphore, today, as we service some of the biggest businesses in the world,
Mhm.
over 2,000 of them, with our business AI cloud, which is an end-to-end data and AI platform. It's a builder's platform for these large businesses to connect their own data, fine tune their AI models on their own, and then build a series of AI agents that they can now roll out in their company and automate several parts of their business. Our competitors in the business AI cloud are three. We compete against Bedrock from Amazon, Agent Space from Google, and Azure Data Factory from Microsoft.
Mhm.
When I was founding the company in 2008, if somebody told me my three competitors are going to be Amazon, Google, and Microsoft, I would have been super excited that, okay, I'm going to do something very interesting. But I promise you, when it became that we were in direct competition and our platform had become that significant for the enterprise, that we were being compared to these three products from three hyperscalers, I had a big oh shit moment, because
Mhm.
it feels great that someday we could compete with them, but when it comes down to competing, the power of distribution that these larger companies has is unparalleled. They do hundreds and millions of trade with the customers that we are working with. They sell cloud, they sell advertising, they sell search, they sell office, they sell many other things to these companies. And when you do that size of business, it's not too hard to bundle in or roll something for free. So, how do you compete against free, no matter how good your product is? And that's what happens when you start to compete against the hyperscalers. The nature of their business is that they are able to bundle a lot of things. And each company, as a platform company, you want to become that size or that nature that someday you are able to bundle many different things. And that's why it's so hard for startups to compete. In that environment, it becomes super critical to be very, very sharp in your positioning. As an example, in the case of Uniphore, when we sell the business AI cloud, we understand that even if a hyperscaler is able
Mhm.
to offer agents and models and the ability to fine tune models with your data as a bundle with cloud, sovereignty is top of mind for CIOs. What does that mean? Their board is saying our AI should not be locked into one cloud environment. Our data should ideally not leave our premises. Nobody should have access to our data. And if we are going to spend time and money in fine tuning these LLMs or SLMs for ourselves, that IP unambiguously should belong to us. And so, sovereignty of data and AI is super critical. And even if somebody were to say, hey, I'll give it to you for free, but your data has to move to me, or your AI will be locked into my cloud environment, that's still not worth it. People will still go with a sovereign solution. Similarly, to work with a cloud company, a hyperscaler, they are incentivized to promote their own LLMs because they spend billions of dollars building it. and they'll make that available to you. Not only are you restricted with choice, but you're not getting the most cost optimized solution because it's in their incentive to make you consume a lot of GPUs, a lot of compute. In the
Mhm.
case of the business AI cloud, we are composable, namely open. We don't have a foundational model of our own. So we leave the choice. Do you want to use an open weights model, an open source model, a
Mhm.
proprietary model? And by the way, no matter which model you choose, we will very strongly encourage you to not use an LLM but an SLM, because most business use cases are actually served better with a 7 or 8 billion parameter model as opposed to an 80 billion parameter model.
Mhm.
Per query, the cost difference between an SLM and LLM is a 100 times cost advantage. 100. All
Mhm.
right. And so, because we don't have our own compute, we don't have our cloud, we don't have our LLM, we have no perverse incentive to reduce choice on behalf of the businesses who work with us. So, the whole promise of business AI, the positioning we've taken and we've sharpened it over many years, is that we are a sovereign, composable, and secure AI platform. I use this as an example for your viewers to understand when you're going up against much larger competitors, it's going to be a fool's errand to try and do everything they do, just do it slightly better, etc. They have more resources and they have the power of distribution that you don't have. And you have to be very sharp in a position that they can't meet given their size. And for that one thing, you're so good that the customer, even if the hyperscaler offers it for free, will have to work with you. I'm reminded of another example that one of my board members told me. He's the CFO of a major cybersecurity company. And again, this is the world's probably top three cybersecurity companies publicly traded. They don't consider the other two companies in top three as their competitors, to my surprise. They consider Microsoft as their
Mhm.
biggest competitor for security. And I said, well, I don't think of Microsoft. I think of Palo Alto, think of CrowdStrike, I think of Zscaler. But guess what? With the Azure cloud, cybersecurity is rolled in for quote unquote free. It's not free, nothing is free. It's part of the package. But to the customer, they don't have to pay separately for cybersecurity.
Mhm.
But again, cybersecurity is one such thing. Even if you offer it for free, I want to make sure I'm getting the highest degree of protection because I'm a mission critical business. So free won't attract me, except if you have a better product, even if you're not a hyperscaler, I'll buy from you. So being sharp in the position uh, and solving a big problem for the customer is the best way to compete against bigger companies.
I think there's so much insight to it, like identifying your competitor and really think deep into it. It's like very important. You may identify the wrong competitor. So maybe someone is offering the similar product, like you mentioned, like the Palo Alto network of the world. Like maybe that's like a product that should be a competitor, but on the other hand, people are competing with Microsoft or because of like all these big tech are offering things for free and things that are quote unquote invisible that sometimes like people kind of ignore, which is, I think this is such a amazing point. I want to be mindful of the time. Maybe we could go with like a 1 minute fire run. I truly enjoy the conversation. I want this conversation to be 5 hours long, but I know that like, we, like you're a very busy person. Maybe we could start with like um, okay, so, like let's end with a quick fire run. What's your favorite book?
Well, I'm a voracious reader.
Mhm.
Um, I like many books. My mentor's book, Connecting the Dots by John Chambers, Michael Dell's book, Play Hard But Win. Um, I have reread the Outliers book from
Mhm.
Malcolm Gladwell recently. And right now I'm reading a book about how China uh,
Mhm.
accelerated its innovation. So at different points of time, I will give you different answers. I love reading
Mhm.
books.
Me too. I love that. I'm gonna definitely make sure I read or reread some of these books. Who would you invite to your dinner party?
Um, Again, this answer could be different at different points in time. Um, I'm very curious right now to have glean into the minds of a few people because I want to learn how they're making decisions. Sometimes it's not obvious to me. President Trump would be one of them. In the business AI community, Elon Musk is another one.
Mhm.
Um, but an evergreen answer, Dalai Lama,
Mhm.
would be somebody I'd love to have a meal with, and
Mhm.
just have a freewheeling conversation.
I love that. Who made the biggest impact in your career?
That's a really hard one because that list is so long, um, that it'll take me 5 hours to answer this one question of
Mhm.
yours. There have been a series of mentors, some who knew they were helping me, and others who I was just quietly learning from. I learned from my customers, I learned from employees who who come and work at Uniphore, and some may not be at Uniphore, but I've learned from different people. But one that comes to mind, for a long period of time, has had a major impact and will hopefully continue to have that, is John Chambers, the former CEO and chairman of Cisco. He became an investor, board member in Uniphore 7 years ago. But more importantly, he's a mentor, he's a coach, and he's a friend. So I'd say there's a lot that I've learned from John, but there's many, many others.
Uh, where can we find you outside of work?
As much as possible, spending time with my two kids and my wife.
Mhm.
I travel a lot for work. I spend long hours in the office, so I'm always living with a certain amount of guilt that I'm not being a good dad or a good husband. So if I'm not at work and not traveling for business, I'm trying to do things that are important to my kids, playing tennis with them, swimming with them, running with them, going shopping with my wife, or taking a vacation.
Love that. Well, Umesh, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It was such an amazing conversation, and you just gave us a masterclass in everything building a startup, GTM, and just in general, like I feel like winning the life of business.
Well, Grace, I will say I really enjoyed this conversation. The first time I've been on your podcast, I've heard many episodes, but this is the first time I was with you. I hope we can do many more of this as different milestones happen at Uniphore.
Amazing. Yeah, that's for sure will happen. Please be our return guest. Thank you so much, Umesh. Appreciate you. Let me quickly end the